To begin, we'll install Gulp through npm. We do this by typing npm install -- global gulp CLI. Once that's done, we can go ahead and start setting up our project. From here, I'll navigate to our project folder. Earlier, we installed the global Gulp command line interface, but now we need to install Gulp into this specific project. While we're at it, since we're using a node module, let's initialize our project with npm by running npm init. We're prompted with a handful of options. You can skip over these for now and edit them later by modifying your package.json file. For now, I'll just give the project a name, Gulp demo, and confirm that everything's correct. Next, I'll install Gulp into my project by running npm install save dev gulp from inside the project directory. This is telling npm to install Gulp and add it to the list of development dependencies in my package.json file. If you're not concerned with a full project and won't be using version control, you can simply run npm install Gulp. Next, we'll create our Gulp file. This file is recognized by the Gulp command when found in the project directory. If we look at the documentation, the basic implementation of the Gulp file looks like this. We import Gulp, in this case with require, and then we set up a Gulp task. Each task takes a name and a callback function. All of our task code goes inside. Now that we have our basic setup, let's look at some plugins or external libraries that we can use with Gulp. If you navigate to the Gulp.js homepage, you can see the plugin section. To start, let's find a plugin to help us compile our Sass into CSS. Each plugin has its own specifications, but I'm going to choose Gulp Sass. This takes me to the basic installation instructions and usage. The first thing I need to do is install Gulp Sass. Back in my terminal, I'll run npm I, which is short for install, -- save dev, to add it to my development dependencies, Gulp Sass. This will install Gulp Sass locally to this project and allow me to use it in my Gulp file. Now in my Gulp file, I'll import Sass. Next, I'll create a new task, and I'll call it SCSS, and once again, pass a callback function. But this time, I'm actually going to include some code. If we look at our basic usage example over here, we have some information to get us started. Most tasks that you run into that take in files and export files will work like so. We'll return a gulp.source, then give it the path of our SCSS or Sass file. In this case, I have a main.scss file inside an SCSS folder. I'm going to target that file and any other SCSS files inside that directory, and I'll do this with an asterisk. Then we'll use pipe, which in Gulp is how we pass in new commands, to call on Sass, which we imported earlier. In the example usage, they include error logging, but for our basic example, we will just simply call the Sass command. Then finally, I'll pipe this file through to its destination by calling gulp dest and giving it the location I want my file to go to, in this case, the CSS folder. Once that's done, we can save our file and give it a try. Here we can see that I have a very basic SCSS file where I'm declaring a variable and giving it the value of blue, and then I'm calling an element selector P and giving the text the color of that variable. As we can see in our CSS folder, there are no current files. If we go back to the terminal, we can run gulp and then the name of our task, which in this case is SCSS. And we'll see that using the gulp file provided, it starts the task and finishes it after 56 milliseconds. If we look back at our project directory, we now have a main.css file, and inside it contains that rule where paragraphs are declared as color blue. This is great, but we really want the ability to watch for changes on files. Gulp offers a watch option as well. If we go back to the Gulp homepage and we go into the documentation, we can see that there's an API documentation for watch. And if we navigate to that, we see that Gulp takes a handful of arguments. What we'll first do is create a new task and name it watch. And here we're going to use the gulp.watch command. Now gulp.watch takes 2 arguments. The first is a glob, either a single glob or an array of globs. A glob is basically a pattern matching mechanism. We've seen this already when we used the asterisk in our SCSS source path earlier. We'll pass in a glob to match our files, and then the second attribute is an array of tasks. In this case, we want it to watch these SCSS files, and any time a change is seen, we want it to call the SCSS task that we defined earlier. We'll save that file, and back in our terminal, we'll go ahead and we'll run this command of gulp watch, and we'll see that it runs. And right now, everything is still the same. We can still see that our main.css file, color of blue, and our Sass file is blue. But if we change this to red and hit save, you'll notice in the terminal it automatically reruns, and our main file has been updated.